Good morning. Just spent the night out here at a rest stop right near EBR-1, which is Experimental Breeder Reactor 1 here in Idaho. It's like right across the way from the Idaho National Lab, where they develop all kinds of new reactor technology and some other stuff as well too. But it's kind of interesting. They actually have a weather station that has a radiation monitor on it. So let's go check that out really quick. So it looks like that kind of long cylinder, that long white cylinder that said Canterbury on it, it's actually a scintillation detector. And so that's to detect the area radiation. It's just an area monitor, just to make sure that nothing's getting out of the National Lab, because it's like right over here. It's cool that they have that. I mean, it's a good location for it, because last night the wind was definitely blowing this way off the lab towards me, and I am detecting a slight increase in background radiation here at this location. So I don't know if that has anything to do with the National Lab or just the geology of this dirt that I'm on right now. So that radioactive waste management complex is just a little bit further down the street from EBR-1. I will not be going there today, just EBR-1. So this trip out to EBR-1 today and to these giant heat exchangers, which are actually prototype nuclear jet engines or some type of propulsion. But this video is actually sponsored by Radioactive. And this is actually pretty entertaining to me, because I was planning on making this video using a Radioactive anyway. And then they approached me about doing a sponsorship for their new Radioactive 102, and I was like, of course. I already had a couple of ideas set up, and if you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you know that I've been using the Radioactive 101 for about a year now, and now they came out with a 102, which is supposed to be a little bit cheaper and the same quality. So I'm actually going to fish that over the fence a little bit and see if I can't get a gamma spectrum of the reactor core here and see what kind of what's making these radioactive, because these heat exchangers out here are actually the most radioactive thing that I've found on the EBR-1 reactor site. Like, the reactor building is a little radioactive, but nothing compared to these guys. So I'm gonna go walk around, build a little radiation map of this area using the Radioactive 102, and see what isotope it actually identifies as well. So I got the Radioactive 102 in my pocket right now, tracking my radiation, and you can actually have it with an alarm set on it to alarm you when you get to a certain dose rate. But I decided to turn that off because it gets a little troublesome when I'm actually filming audio. So I'm gonna walk around here and build a little radiation map. What's interesting is that there's a bunch of birds, like crows and all kinds of other stuff, that are nesting inside of these fairly radioactive reactors that are out here in the parking lot. I don't know what type of effect that has on them. Maybe something. So the Radioactive 102 actually connects to a smartphone. Right now it's only Android, but they're working on an iOS device as well, or iOS app. And what's kind of cool is that you can like have it connected to there, and then it'll log all that radiation data, so then you could go back and look at it again, and it'll log like certain like radiation events that go over like your alarm or something like that. So it's a handy thing to have when you're out here exploring radioactive sites or objects or something like that. So look at the size of this thing. I don't know how they're gonna fit that on a plane, jet, whatever. This is a heavily shielded locomotive that is lead lined and is built this way so the operator of the locomotive could remain safe while pushing around these nuclear jet engines. In this area also, what they do is they keep track of the dose rate with this film badge here. So they put these along the perimeter of the fence, and then they're constantly monitoring the radiation dose rate that's coming off of these reactors. Just kind of keep an eye on it, make sure it's not doing anything weird, which it shouldn't. And then they also have this where you can't get in, because apparently the radiation does get kind of intense in certain areas around here. These diagrams come from a report on the decommissioning of these nuclear jet engines. And as you can see, the dose rates varied wildly, but some of them get pretty high, up to 175 MR. And that's about 1,700 microsieverts. To put that radiation into context, at that strongest point of 175 MR, that's like getting 175 chest x-rays in an hour if you were to stand right up against that area. This is a pretty handy piece of kit or tool to have around with you when you're exploring stuff that's radioactive like these jet engines. I know it's not like a giant scintillator, like they make like 3-inch detectors that can like detect all kinds of stuff, but you know what, for an entry-level gamma spectroscopy, radiation tracker, dosimeter, monitor, it's a pretty cool little package. And I've been carrying the 101 around with me since November, and I take it with me on all my trips, and now I've replaced it with the Radioactive 102. So let's see what kind of spectrum that this gives. I'm already seeing a pretty big peak for cesium-137, which would make sense because that's a fission product. This is a nuclear reactor, so it makes sense that there would be cesium-137 emitting gamma rays that this is picking up on. So the Radioactive 102, or 101 for this matter, doesn't need to be hooked up to a smartphone. It can actually just be a working standalone and collecting data, and then you can bring that back to a computer, hook it up, and see what the gamma spectrum is if you like ran one out in a location and wanted to see what it was doing, or the dose rate or something along those lines. And so it doesn't need a phone to work, but having a smartphone connected to the detector is extremely helpful, and then it kind of opens up a lot of like other functions. So I wanted to compare the Radioactive 102 to the Radi B20 that I always use, and they were both giving very similar dose rates. When I switched over to counts per minute, you can see that the Radioactive 102 is detecting way more radiation than the Radi B20 is. So that's the difference between a detector like the Radi B20 and the Radioactive 102, is that the Radioactive 102 is actually going to be much more sensitive to gamma radiation, but the Radi B20 is going to be more sensitive to alpha. It can actually detect alpha radiation, which the Radioactive 102 can't, and it can detect beta radiation at different energy levels, which the Radioactive 102 has a harder time at. It can still detect beta radiation, but it has a very hard time detecting. It's mainly for gamma radiation, but almost every single radioactive isotope emits some form of gamma energy. And so the Radicode 1 and 2 is extremely helpful, like when I'm walking around and I'm trying to look for uranium or like something that's radioactive. It is far more sensitive because the crystal that it uses in there is just, it can pick up on gamma radiation extremely well, as opposed to this pancake sensor on this Radii B20. Now let's go inside EBR1 and take the Radicode 1 and 2 in there and see what it has to say about the stuff inside there. Going inside EBR1 right now. So this area is pretty fenced off. I mean, there's like contamination, signs or radiation signs saying controlled area, underground radioactive material area. So there's probably like stuff buried out here that they don't want anyone going out into. So they do have like a gate kind of running around like the areas that people are allowed in. Be interested to go into the places that people aren't allowed in, see what can be found. But anyway, let's go inside. So there are people from the Idaho National Lab at EBR1 to give tours, but you can also do a self-guided tour. So this object resting on this pallet looks like a heavily shielded container to transport radioactive material. So this is about the diameter of the reactor core. And as you can see, I put my hand on there so you can kind of get an idea of what it is. So all the smaller holes in the middle are where the reactor fuel would have been. The slightly larger holes are where the blanket would have been, which is the breeding blanket, which would have been comprised of uranium-238. And then there'd be larger chunks on the outside of it too. And then on the very outside of the reactor, there would have been graphite to help reflect in neutrons. So this reactor used NaC, which is sodium and potassium, to cool the reactor. It wasn't used as a moderator because this was a fast reactor. They didn't want to slow down the neutrons like you have in a normal water reactor. The reason why you want to have no water in a NaC area is because sodium and potassium react violently when they come into contact with water, as in explode. This zero power reactor actually allowed the Idaho National Lab to test out different reactor configurations without having to build out a full reactor. So this monitor would have been at a radiologically controlled checkpoint where workers would have had to step into and get checked for radiation when they entered EBR1 and when they left. So these are the fuel rods, and I believe they are stacked in this particular configuration so then they can't react with one another, because if they get too close, that's when problems can happen. This missile-looking thing is actually a heavily shielded container used to extract spent nuclear fuel so that it can be safely moved around the facility. So this is the hot cell behind me. Now this allowed people that worked here to carry out radiochemistry. And so they used these manipulators back behind me to actually carry out the experiments inside the hot cell from safety, because this hot cell is meant to block all the radiation from inside so none of it gets out. And so there's layers and layers of leaded glass with mineral oil in between them so they can actually see through it. And then they use these manipulators to carry out their experiments inside of there by pouring acids or other radioactive solutions, dissolving metals, all kinds of that stuff. And so this is really cool. And you can see one of the other panels over here. It actually is, some of the mineral oil has drained out of it, and so it makes it impossible to see through the glass. And so it seems like the mineral oil is not only there to provide shielding along with the leaded glass, but also as an optical aid so they can actually see them. So behind me is the nuclear core for EBR1. And I'm going to go on top of there in a second, because you can actually go on top and look down into the core. Now this was a breeder reactor, so that means that it actually made more fuel than it consumed. So that was pretty cool, but for whatever reason, it wasn't the popular choice for nuclear power in this country.
Not going to be very near other military.
Those big blocks on tracks are doors. They're heavily shielded doors to block the entrance to these hot cells. And I believe they're made this heavy so then people didn't accidentally go inside of there. It always took 2 people to open up these things. This is the room where they do a lot of fuel handling. Would have been very radioactive in here. The air in here has a very kind of machiny taste. I don't want to say metallic, because then everyone's going to be like, oh, Chernobyl. No, it's not like that. I have my Radioactive 102 running away, and I'm not hearing anything crazy. So I'm not worried about the radiation in here. So this is the washroom, and this was the room used to get all of the knack off of the fuel assemblies. This is a radiation monitor, and these are throughout the entire facility. So this is on the other side of the hot cell. where the operator would have been. These light bulbs were the first things to be powered by nuclear energy. Everyone that was present for that historic moment put their names up on the wall in chalk, and that's what you see there. This is the reactor control room. So there was a reactor meltdown, November 29th, 1955. And this came after a test that was done to try and chase down some problems that they were having with the reactor. The reactor core got so hot that it actually melted the fuel elements together. They did end up evacuating the building because there was an increase in radiation, but that was it. There was no explosion, there was no additional contamination. They constructed a temporary cave, a heavily shielded area with manipulator arms inside of there so they could actually extract the reactor core that had melted down. Well, that's going to do it for EBR1. Hopefully you enjoyed a look at this, at the world's first nuclear power reactor. You could come here, I think, between June 1st and the end of September, and then they have the area closed because the winters get pretty crazy here. But if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, comment, subscribe, and if you're looking to get a Radicode 102, I'll leave a link in the description, and you can just go there and grab one, and I'll just put a link right here too, just in case you feel like typing it in and not going to the description. But anyway, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and thanks to Radicode for sponsoring this video. It really helps, and I'm glad I'm able to work with sponsors of products that I actually use. That's awesome. Anyway, until next time. Later.